All right, thanks everybody, and thanks for joining us today in our session combining Salesforce and VueJS for development superpowers. First of all, for the people in the back, we're going to show quite some code and some configuration files, so if you're not able to see it, feel free to move forward during the session, that's fine. The other thing is we have quite a lot of information for a relatively short session, so don't worry, we'll be sharing the slides afterwards, and also all the code that we'll be showing, we'll share it afterwards as well. So feel free to take pictures, but everything will be shared as well. Let's start with introducing ourselves.
Yes, so I'm Joey. I'm a full stack developer at Plauti ISV, and I've been working for 3 years now with Salesforce technologies like Apex and LWC.
Yeah, my name is Ruud. As you can see, we've dressed up for the occasion because normally we look like this. I'm a technical architect at Plauti ISV. You may know us from the app duplicate check on Salesforce, on the Salesforce App Exchange. Yeah, so we're an ISV. We mainly build applications for the App Exchange, but this is also applicable for non-ISVs if you build custom applications for a single org, for instance. All right. So let's first start with a question. Who has ever worked with some of these frameworks? Frameworks like VueJS, Angular, or React? Nice. And who of you guys has ever integrated them to use them within Salesforce? All right, a couple of them, that's nice. Okay, so first of all, if you've used these frameworks, you probably know that they're quite a joy to work with, actually. They're aimed at developer happiness. So that is also why we saw that and we thought, well, why can't we have all the nice stuff? For instance, using NPM package inside of Salesforce projects. The NPM ecosystem is huge. There's a lot of great open source packages out there for JavaScript frontends in this case. And it's quite cumbersome actually to use them within Salesforce. But the open source frontend frameworks like Vue or React, they have that out of the box, and we wanted that too. We also needed a bit of a richer framework, a bit more capabilities like routing and state management. I'll dive into that later. And it's also just there's a broader pool of developers and online knowledge available about these frameworks. And also, there was something for us personally, it might also be the case for you, but we also have some non-Salesforce projects, and we wanted our front-end code to be portable. We would actually like it if we could switch and share some of our code between applications within and outside of Salesforce. So let's compare. Quite a big slide, so I'm going to walk you through it. Using third-party packages from the NPM ecosystem. That was something that we really wanted to use. For instance, if you have to create a chart or do something complex, you don't want to reinvent the wheel at every time. So with VueJS and their default build tool, you're able to use millions of open source packages. You probably don't want to use million in a single project, but you get the point. In LWC, it's not supported. It's possible. We've managed to do it actually by basically downloading manually, importing it as a library, but you're losing a couple capabilities there. You cannot use the npm command line, which is tricky because then you cannot really update your packages easily. And also there's a file size limit, which is on the lower end, so it won't be applicable for all packages, won't be possible for all packages. Well, obviously we needed it to run natively in Salesforce since we're an ISV and we build native Salesforce applications. And Vue doesn't do that out of the box, so we had to tackle that. LWC obviously does, because it's provided by Salesforce. The same goes for easily interacting with Salesforce data and Apex. So that means S objects, Apex classes, custom endpoints. That's not supported out of the box in Vue, of course. So we have to tackle that as well. Luckily, LWC does support that. They have the wire annotation, works great. You can use both Salesforce's own APIs as well as your own custom endpoints. Then some state management tooling. So one of the things that we saw in our more complex front ends, so big configuration pages with multiple subpages and tabs, was that we had some issues with state management in LWC. We encountered what is usually called prop drilling. So you have this root level component, it's your page, and you have a component on there, it's a tab control, and you may have some subpages, subtabs, And it can get really deep, and you have a component in a component in a component in a component. What happens, you need some state from the top level. So then you're passing it down and down and down and down all the way. And then if something changes all the way down, you have to throw an event and throw it all the way up again. And that can be really hard to manage after a while. Because we had some really large components, and that was just tricky for us. And Vue offers some state management options actually, like Piña, and it basically offers a store where your components can all interact with, and they can get data from there, manipulate data there. That's very convenient. Front-end routing, there's multiple options for that as well in Vue. So front-end routing, what does that mean? Let's say you have an advanced page with multiple sub-pages, as I just mentioned, then you would probably, well, you could do multiple things in LWC. You could either create conditional components and either show or hide them depending on a condition, or you keep a variable with the tab or page that they're looking at. That would work, probably, but it can get messy over time because it can become quite a large component. You may end up with prop drilling again. So one of the things that we look for is front-end routing. So you can basically just register a router with multiple routes, and it does the same. It still renders components conditionally, but it abstracts it away in a nice way. And that's what we liked, so we needed that as well. Local dev server, really important for us. Joe is going to show a bit more about that, but that basically means you have changes locally, and if you make changes to your front end, you want to see them immediately. You don't want to push to an org and see it there. That takes a while. So Vue has that. Most of these front-end frameworks have it, and most of the things that we're telling today actually goes for React and Angular as well, but it's just that Vue is our framework of choice. Yeah, LWC has that too. It's partially supported now. It's still in beta, I believe, and I think not all features are available yet, so that's a close call. Then the feature set. We needed quite a rich feature set out of the box because that just saves us time, saves us lines of code, so less chance of bugs. Vue has many helpers, but also it has two-way data binding. That's interesting, and Joey's going to show that as well. But basically what it means is if you have an input, and that's linked to a variable in your JavaScript, so an HTML input linked to a JavaScript variable. If you change the variable from code, it can change the value of your input. That's the one-way data binding, similar to a tracked annotation in LWC. But the interesting part is that the other way around is not supported by LWC out of the box. And in Vue, what you can do is actually register it to link it to a variable, and once you do that, you update the input updates in the browser by the user. The variable updates accordingly as well. So we'll dive into that later. And of course, there's no use of a shadow DOM, which helps for using third-party frameworks from the NPM library, because yeah, we tried doing stuff like that in LWC, and the shadow DOM was sometimes preventing us from doing these kind of things. As I already mentioned, we needed components that are fully portable outside of the Salesforce ecosystem, and we can do that with Vue as well. We tried LWC open source. It works, but there are some APIs that are heavily tied to the Salesforce platform, so we ended up still having to rewrite quite some of our components. Then TypeScript, it's supported in both. Support was just a bit easier in Vue, and in LWC we couldn't fully get it working the way we liked it. Last but not least, Vue doesn't leverage Salesforce CSS styling. There's no SLDS there, of course. And LWC has that out of the box, so you can use all the nice CSS classes and make your app look like Salesforce. So these are problems for us, because if we want to use Vue in Salesforce, we have to tackle this. A desired state would be something like this, because then we can have all the nice things from Vue. We can have all the nice things that the web developers have, but we can also still leverage similar technologies that we were used to in LWC. So we're not here to hate on LWC, of course. We love it. We've been using it for a while. We also love the Salesforce platform and mostly Apex as well. But we just wanted a bit more control over our front ends because they're quite advanced and we were just having trouble managing it. Which is why we opted for Vue, because we had the most knowledge in our company for that framework. So the challenge, making Vue run natively within Salesforce, was one of the issues that Vue doesn't support out of the box. But of course Salesforce has thought about this as well. And luckily they have provided something that is called a Lightning Container component. And it allows you to host content developed with a third-party framework, like Vue or React, within a Lightning component. And that would be an Aura component in this case. And the content is uploaded as a static resource and hosted in an iframe. And that's great because these type of applications, these front-end applications, they basically, after compiling, end up as an HTML file and a JavaScript file. So if we can host it as a static resource and serve that in Salesforce, we're basically there. It runs natively in Salesforce. You still have your tabs on top. You have the app launcher in the top left. All feels like Salesforce. So that's good. So how do you do that? Well, you build and bundle a Vue application, make sure that it works. There's a tremendous amount of tutorials about how to do that online, so I'm not going to bother you with that. And then we need to make the Vue app end up as a static resource in your Salesforce as a DX project. Then we have to serve the static resource within Salesforce using the Aura Lightning container, and probably create a tab to display it. Then we're there. So how would you do that? How would you actually make the Vue app end up in a static resource? This is a normal as a DX project. Only difference is that I created a UI directory as well, which holds a Vue app.
Can everyone see it, by the way? Because we might have to zoom in.
If I have to zoom in, let me know, or feel free to move forward. It's no problem. Yeah. So, well, let's assume this app is working. The interesting part here for now is the configuration. There's this build section, and what's important to see is that we configured the output directory, line 31, to be the static resources. I created a static resource named Frontend, so it's going to end up there. So when the Vue app is going to be compiled, it's going to end up there. And then the rest of it is also quite important, because we had to do a lot of trial and error with these rollup options. And apparently you have to set the assets there to an empty string. So we'll share this config with you afterwards as well. But this was a lot of trial and error for us to get it right and to make it work with the Lightning container. So I wanted to mention that. And now move on to my static resource that I've created. So there's the static resource called Frontend. In here, a index.html file, an index.js file appeared, and that's interesting because that's mainly our app. And as you can see, there's something strange here. There's a manifest.json. I'm not sure if anyone has heard of it. Okay, that's good because there's a caveat here. It's not really documented by Salesforce. You have to search some PDFs to find it. But if this is not here, and you do not define that you actually want to work with the index.html in that static resource, it's not going to serve it for some reason. So this is good to know as well. We'll share this with you as well later. And I'll come back to this as well. But yeah, important to make sure that it's there. And then lastly, I almost forgot, in the Aura component itself, so I created an Aura component called to-do app. We have to set the Lightning container. We reference the static resource named Frontend that I created, and you have to specify index.html. It also has to be named index.html. It cannot be something else, I guess, because then it didn't work for us. So that's good to know as well. Right. So at some point when you're done, and you could do that in a GitHub pipeline or do it manually. So you build your app locally. You use the local dev server, so you see changes instantly. Then you build your app, or do it automatically, and push it to Salesforce, and then profit. But then it runs natively in Salesforce, so we have it in there. But we cannot interact with Salesforce data and Apex classes yet. How would we call our backend? How would we do that? Luckily, Salesforce has thought of that as well. The Lightning container component that I just showed you It comes with an NPM library actually. You can just install it via NPM. And it helps you make calls to the Apex controllers that you may have. It uses Visualforce remoting under the hood, so it's the same technology as that. So you need to annotate with a remote action. But it's on NPM. You can use it in any framework, React, Vue, whatever. And it basically goes like this. You go npm install lightning container in your terminal, easy. And then you type lcc.call apex to call apex. The syntax is class name dot method name. So you're probably familiar with that. You can pass some parameters as well, because it's basically just the Visualforce remoting that we've all been working with in the past. However, because it's very similar to Visualforce remoting, you have to specify the class that you want to interact with from your frontend application. In this case, the static resource that we have created. And there was a problem for us there. So first of all, let me get back to the mighty manifest.json that has given us some problems. You also have to register your Apex controller here. If you don't do that, so this is in the static resource. If you don't do that, it's not going to interact with that that backend controller, and it's just not going to work. Even if you annotate them with remote action, it's not going to see them, and it's also not going to give you an error. It's just not working then. So this is good to know too. So yeah, let me move on to the next one. Right, yeah. So they only support one backend class, but we would have quite a big Vue application with maybe 10 pages, let's say a user page, an overview page, a dashboard page. You ideally want your backend controllers to be separated and not have one class with all the methods. So we came up with something for that. And also the local dev server you would use to build your front-end Vue app, it's not going to be able to do Visualforce remoting. So it's not going to be able to use the LCC class. That only works in Salesforce. So how could we get Salesforce data from a Scratch org or sandbox into our local machine? We came up with a trick, or you may call it a hack or workaround. But for these two problems, we need a web framework in the backend, in Apex, that dispatches requests to different controllers so that we can separate our logic over multiple controllers. And we basically decided that our controllers are going to be Apex callables, because you can call them from everywhere using a string to tell what you want to call. And yeah, I'm going to show you that. So what we have done is the following. In the meantime, let me check how much time I still have. Okay. We have created this directory called Web API, and we'll also share this Web API with you afterwards. And there's an interesting part here, the entry points. We have created a Visualforce entry point, obviously because we need that to call Apex from our backend. Then we created the handle object. It's basically the only method, handle method. It's basically the only method in that class. It's a remote action, so we can call it from the front end with the NPM library from Salesforce that I just showed. And it calls a web handler.handle. What's that web handler? Let me click through. All right. Yeah, it's basically a simple framework that we created. You have to register your controller, so you have to tell that if I call this, I want to call this class, and this class is a callable that contains multiple methods. So we opted for the same syntax as Salesforce uses, which will be class name and then method name. And what we do, the request comes in the Visualforce action that I just showed you. Then it reads the request body, because we specify which callable we want to call and which method on the callable. And the web framework actually handles the rest, so it calls the callable and responds. This is kind of a workaround, but it works for us. And it still helps you to separate your backend code nicely and have nice and clean separation of concerns, while being able to have a single entry point to reach the backend. And then lastly, we have a web framework that handles the requests and responses and dispatches to the appropriate controllers. We can also create a REST endpoint that does the same. So we created a REST entry point as well. That's just an Apex REST endpoint. It calls the same web framework. It works the exact same actually. And we could deploy this to scratch orgs or sandboxes. So while we are working in the front end in the dev server locally on my machine, it can just call this REST endpoint, and the data and the response will be the same as if it was running in Salesforce and using the Visualforce endpoint. So that's nice. Of course, you don't want to deploy this REST endpoint into your production org because you can use the actual one there. But I guess you get the point. So let's see how that would work. All right. So we created a wrapper in the front end around that library that Salesforce offers to integrate with the backend. On our wrapper, you call, and you specify the controller and the method that you want to call as a string. We're going to check, are we running in local development mode? If that is the case, we want to use the Salesforce REST API to interact with the backend. We're going to use the REST entry point that I just showed. And then next up, you would read the request, call the appropriate callable, call it, dispatch it, handle, and response. So there would be some custom basis logic that is in your callable, and you get a response. If we're actually running inside of Salesforce, then we know, okay, this REST endpoint is not available probably, likely for security reasons, because we don't deploy it there. We call the Visualforce endpoint that I just showed as well. That also calls the web framework, dispatches to the callable, calls it, and responds. So you have a full interaction with your Salesforce backend while working in the local dev server, and that's really a time saver. Joey will show that in a bit. So we also tackled this one. We tackled interacting with Salesforce from VueJS, which is nice. Last but not least, we wanted Salesforce CSS styling. That's not there out of the box, but Salesforce made this really easy. So if you've already sat through the previous two issues that we were having, then this one is going to be a breeze. There's SLDS, Salesforce Lightning Design System. We probably all know it. And there are HTML and CSS UI elements, basically classes that you can just apply to your elements, and it will look like Salesforce. And they are available in Salesforce, but also on NPM. And since we're able to install any NPM package now into our project, we can just do npm install Salesforce Design System. Done. We import it into the Vue bundle, and that is a single line of code. There we go, line 3. And you're done. You can make it look like Salesforce because you can leverage all the classes and icons that they have to offer. Okay, that's good. So basically all the challenges that we were having are now supported with minimal custom configuration. So we have to set up the backend framework. Takes a bit of work, but it's built, so we can just reuse that. We have to set up the Aura component with the Lightning container in there. We have to set the manifest file, which was a pain, but now we know how it works, so we can do that. So everything is now supported with minimal configuration. So we can have all the nice things that Vue.js or React would have to offer within Salesforce, and it takes minimal configuration to have full integration with Salesforce. So I think it's time to put this in action and show some of the nice features that Vue is to offer, and also the way we interact with the backend. And Joey is going to show us that by doing some live demo, so fingers crossed.
Yes, so now it's time for the fun part. Let's put everything Ruud has told into practice. So we've prepared a Scratch organization with the custom as object called a to-do list item, and this is the list view of that. What we want to have is an app that visualizes the data that's here and to be able to interact with it. So we've made a part of it. So this is a simple to-do app, but it's not quite working still because let's say I want to add items. It's not working yet, so we have to fix some issues here, and we are going to do that on the local dev server. Yes, so let me start with immediately showing you the hot reloads. So if I just save, and then here's my project running in the local dev server, can see the title changes immediately.
No need to wait for pushing to an org. That's already a nice time saver.
And then we would like to add items. So what do we have to do for that? We can see this button. Let me zoom in for a bit. Close this. Yes, so we have a click handler here that adds the item. However, on the input, there's no variable defined that holds the actual input value. So how would you do that in LWC? Going back, we would have to define a variable called to do item, and on the input itself we would have to register an onChange handler with the appropriate callback, and in this function we can set the value. Now, how does it work in Vue? We simply leverage the two-way data binding of Vue with vModel. So the to-do item variable I've defined here is now bound to the input. And if I would go to the local dev server, we would have to catch the flight tomorrow back. So let's put that on there. Quickly refresh. Catch flight. Now you can see
nice.
that the flight is added. But for example, the button, does it really look like Salesforce button right now? Not really. So now we are going to leverage the slds styling that we've imported. So the only thing I would have to do is add the appropriate slds classes, which would be brand, save. Right, and now it looks a bit more like an actual Salesforce button. One more thing is we would like to make the finished items a bit more stand out. So what I've done is I've defined a custom CSS class at the bottom, so done in this case, which will strike through the text and make it green if it's finished. And let's see how we would do that in LWC. Yes, we had to define the array of to-do items, of course. And then if you wanted to add these classes conditionally to the HTML, we would have to make a getter, which just returns the item and the computed class when the item is completed. And in this case, we have to do it like this because all the classes that the CSS classes that would element would need should be on both sides of the equation here. But wait, that looks like this in the actual HTML. So we have the simple for each loop, and we just add the class as a variable. But in Vue, we can use conditional CSS inline, which is, or classes even, it's really nice. So we have the task item here, and the only thing I would have to do is to dynamically add the class, which is an object in this case, and then the class name as key, which should be there if the item is completed. And if I go back here, it's updated.
That one-liner is quite a time saver. Saves a lot of redundant code, I guess.
It would save a lot of code, yes. One more thing is that we would like to talk to make the app talk with the backend. It already does that for a part, so it's getting the items. We can update it. And also we would like to delete items, but that's not implemented yet. And that's where the backend part comes into play. We have the controller here. So to delete an item, I've just quickly made a delete function, which simply deletes the item. And the only thing I have to do is add the method to the callable. Like this. Hit save. And then you will see it won't work instantly, because any Apex code that you change like this would need to be pushed to the organization first to work. So let's combine everything, and in one fell swoop we need to build our app to the static resources. So we do that with one build. So we build the app and put all the assets into static resources. And when that's done, I can just push everything to the Salesforce org.
This build step can be perfectly automated in a pipeline as well, if you want to do that automatically.
So you can see that this small change already takes a considerable amount of time. So if you do all the front-end changes locally and then push it to the org, you save a lot of time. So now go back here, refresh. And now you can see that the app is totally updated as we would like it to be. And then there's one more thing, since Ruud has told we can use npm packages. I've prepared a little bar chart here, because we just installed the view chart, because in LWC it's notoriously difficult to make, for example, bar chart. So it's really nice if we could use this in our apps. So the only thing we have to do is we need to import the actual component. And then we just paste it into our code. Like this. And now we have a simple bar chart, which I can attend to. You wouldn't like to make, you wouldn't want to make this in LWC.
All right, thank you for showing us these great insights. So it's nice that we have this. To summarize, we have this web framework that we can use to interact with Salesforce from both the local dev server as well as in Salesforce. We can still structure our backend code how we like it, because we can leverage callables for that. Yeah, so we're able to use npm packages, and we're able to use a framework that is very rich in features. So adding a conditional CSS class is just a one-liner. That can save a lot of time. So I think that's great, and I think that this will work for us, and it actually does, because we use it already. And the repository that we just showed you, so the SFDX project, configured with the Vue build tools, all configured to end up in the static resources. The Aura component is set up. Our web framework is in there, so you can leverage it as well. There are some controllers registered. Be sure to take a picture, and if you want to try this at home and you want to get started with maybe Vue within Salesforce or something else like React within Salesforce, I think this would be a great starting point. All right, so last but not least, it might be time for some questions.
If we actually have time, I think we...
Have you gone through security review with the bundle, Vue bundle, and did Salesforce have any concerns?
So with this specific part, we did not have to do security review yet. We are using it since recently, but we've been using a similar but more ugly approach for a while already, and that got through security review, yeah. But I do have to say that if you write your controllers like this, You do have to do some permission checks maybe manually, depending on your use case, of course. But yeah, it should be fine, I guess. Yeah.
You mentioned in it about the shadow DOM and how he doesn't have that. So when you implement it in a Lightning container, does that not then lock it in the shadow DOM and still have complete control?
Yeah, actually, it's
okay. You should repeat the question for the people at home.
Yeah, for the people at home, I will have to repeat the question. Sorry. So yeah, you asked if the shadow DOM would not be affected in that Aura component that I showed, the Lightning container. And actually, Salesforce just renders an iframe there. And the only thing they prevent you to do is breaking out of that iframe. So you cannot access basically Salesforce UI components, but everything in there is yours. It's just an HTML file that they render, served by the browser. So you have the freedom of implementing any NPM package that would normally be interfering with the shadow DOM, for instance. Yeah. Any more questions? All right, in the back.
Have you come across any sort of terms of accounting for financial accounting that try to capitalize development? So one of the big issues with developing on Salesforce is that code that you develop as a component can't run on other platforms, therefore you can't capitalize your development costs. Have you found anything where you come across any terms where you can capitalize that in development, that front-end development, using this technique?
Yeah, actually what we did is we have a shared library of front-end components, and we use it in multiple projects. So we use it within Salesforce, we use it in web apps, and also in apps for other platforms. And we've been able to leverage the same components that we developed in Salesforce on web apps, and also components that we developed for web apps in Salesforce. So your question was if that, I guess your question was if that actually saved us some real time, and I guess it did. Yeah, for sure. Did I answer your question with that?
Yeah, it's more about the accounting rules, really. How you sort of account for that, or capitalize that cost over 5 or 7 years or whatever.
Yeah, we've not been using it for that time frame yet.
Yeah, but because it took us like a year to trial and error this.
Yeah. Any more questions? Yes?
Could we go back one slide for a second?
Yeah, of course.
We just leave it at this for now.
Yeah. You're welcome. All right. If there's no more questions, then thank you all for being here, and have a great day.
Yes.
MarCloud is marketing automation for Salesforce. Our team of certified professionals can lead you on your Sales Cloud, Marketing Cloud account engagement, and Marketing Cloud engagement journey. Implementation. At MarCloud, we can assist with new implementations and complex migrations. Templates and training courses. MarCloud offers on-demand training courses to help you on your Salesforce journey. Free account audit. Understand your platforms with our free account audit. Support with ad hoc projects. Manage and implement your Salesforce and Marketing Cloud goals on a one-off project basis. Ongoing consulting. Lean on MarCloud as an extension of your team during your Salesforce journey. Simply visit our website to learn more.